Welcome to Everyday Economics, a weekly podcast about the economics in daily life. I'm your host, Puja Mehra. A few weeks back, I had recorded an episode with Suranjali Tandon, who had explained why the salaried are wrong to believe that they pay more income tax than any other class in India. Another such commonly held perception concerns rich Indians. Many people believe that most high-income earners do not pay income taxes they are required legally to pay. From whatever I have read and studied so far, I'm inclined to agree with this perception. A few economists, though, have started challenging the idea that a large number of rich Indians dodge taxes. One such young economist is Dr. Rishabh Kumar, who is an assistant professor in Boston and is my guest on the podcast today. I asked him to explain why he believes that the number of rich Indians dodging income tax may not be very large. Hi, Rishabh. Welcome to Everyday Economics. Thanks for taking out the time.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We've been trying to schedule this recording for weeks now, and finally we record just a day after a big scoop that's out in the papers and the world is talking about. So first, tell me, did you have insider information on the New York Times scoop on President Trump's tax returns?
No, I've been completely out of the loop on basically any news that doesn't have to do with the virus right now. But this was kind of expected. I think there's been speculation.
This is exactly what we are going to talk about.
Yeah.
I saw the news and I was like, oh my God, this is just what we were planning to talk about.
No, I also thought the same. When I saw the news, this is the first thought that actually came to my mind. And instead of anything about India, it was this really that came into my mind. But not surprising, I would say.
Yeah, not surprising. But $750 was, I thought the figure was a bit, I didn't expect it to be so low.
Yeah, I know. But that's just how I guess tax returns work.
Creative accounting.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So let's talk about India. So you and I have been talking about this. So tell my listeners, what is your view about, do most high income earners in India pay income taxes that they're legally required to pay, or are many of them escaping the tax net? And we are talking about this question because there's an impression in India that the tax GDP ratio is low because a large number of people don't pay the taxes that they're legally required to pay. None less than the Prime Minister himself holds this view, which he articulated some time back, and he has, in fact, many times articulated. I think it is also the philosophy of a lot of the entire tax terrorism style operation of India's tax authorities. You have been saying to me that you don't think that there are a lot of people who are not paying taxes that they're legally required to pay. So, let's talk about why you think so and what are your views on this?
I would say firstly that I think most eligible taxpayers are being counted. That is, the tax authorities do have returns from people who should be filing a return and at least legally filing a return, and most of who should be paying taxes. So I think the question is whether the tax threshold in India is too high to actually capture enough people. Because if you look at the 2018 income tax statistics, about 3.4% of the adult population pays taxes, and about 9% of the adult population files tax returns. So that is more or less consistent with what you would expect with a country where the average income, per capita income, is about $2,000, or in terms of rupees, it falls between 1.1 to 1.4 lakh rupees per person, or about 2.8 lakh rupees per adult. I think that's a fairly good reflection of the number of people who should be in the tax net. Now, the question is whether everyone who should be paying taxes is paying the taxes they're required to pay. And I think the fact is, legally speaking, you cannot say they're not paying their share of taxes. The tax code has all these legal loopholes that can be exploited to lower your tax return, to lower the income that you're supposed to show. But that is a problem of the tax code, not of people necessarily evading taxes.
Right. You do know that the Central Board of Direct Taxes in India gives out detailed analysis of all the income tax returns that filed with it. And the
Yeah.
latest they released this data was, I think, in December last year. And
Yes.
this is
Yes.
the data for the financial year 2017-18. And
Hmm.
according to this data, only three people in India file taxes, declaring taxable income of more than 500 crore. Do you find that believable? Only three individuals more than earning taxable income of more than 500 crore?
I would say that is more or less what was to be expected. That's 500 crores rupees, which are not, that's not salary, that's some kind of capital income that they report above 500 crores. I would say that's more or less consistent with what should be expected. The tax statistics that you're talking about, I've been working with this for some time. I mean, since about 2016, when these tax statistics were released for the first time, I published a paper in the EPW about the shape of the tax distribution and the income tax distribution. So I've been studying this for some time, and I mean, full disclosure, I come from a family that was related to various tax authorities, so I'm not necessarily praising the tax authorities for what they do, but I think they have a fairly good grip on who is paying taxes and what level of incomes there are at the absolute top. So these 500 crores in tax in incomes that are shown that show up in these tax returns, I think they're fully consistent with the income distribution in India. Three people above 500 crores is, in my view, it's fully consistent with the income distribution in India.
Okay, in the 5 to 10 crore income bracket, there are only 5,132 taxpayers, and in the 10 to 25 crore range, there are just about 2,000 individuals.
Yes,
That
yes.
seems too less to me.
There's a very simple
Too
mathematical,
few.
yeah, I would say it appears that way, but there's a very simple mathematical formula that economists use to fit an income distribution, particularly at the top. And for the average income in India and the average adult income in India, it's fully consistent that these numbers, they show up the way they do. That is, I would say that about the top 0.2% of the tax-paying population is making more than 1 crore. That's fully consistent with the overall returns. Top 0.2% perfectly fits this mathematical formula if you take the whole population of taxpayers and the whole population of people who file income tax returns.
Okay, let's look at the salaried. Since you think 2,000 individuals between 10 to 25 crores is believable.
Yeah.
They gave the salary breakup, and they found that um, just about the average salary income is 7.12 lakhs of all the taxpayers who declare salaried incomes.
Uh-huh.
And most taxpayers, that is more than 81 lakh taxpayers, earn a salary between 5.5 and 9.5 lakhs.
Yeah.
Only 81 lakh people. Then how is it that India is seen as this whole consumption story? And this 81 lakh, by the
Yeah.
way, includes all the government employees, all PSU employees, all state government employees, everybody who draws salaries from government and
Uh-huh.
government related entities.
Yeah.
Do you find this number too small?
The number might be smaller than it should be. I'm not saying that people don't evade taxes. I'm sure that people do, and I'm sure people have various ways of lowering their income for their income tax filing. But these numbers are not, I mean, think about it this way. The average income in India is 1.1 lakh, and the average is already skewed by all these high incomes. So the median income is obviously much, much, much lower than 1 lakh. So to say that not that many people make between, say, greater than 50 lakhs or greater than 10 lakhs it's not an aberration, I think. I think this is what should be expected for a country of India's size and a country of India's per capita income levels. There was an article by Praveen Chakravarti a few weeks ago, I think. I think we spoke about this on
Yes, we
Twitter, I
did.
think, yeah. I think he very accurately captures the picture. And I say this as someone who has written critically on Praveen Chakravarti's past analysis on income tax statistics, but he very accurately captures the picture that a small fraction of Indians pay taxes because the tax threshold is very high, right? And only the fact is that only 3 to 4% of the population makes more than three times its average income is something that's consistent, not just in India, but in most other developed and rich countries, actually. So the fact that we find these income levels should not be too surprising. I think the main concern is that if we want people to pay taxes, the unfortunate truth is that the tax threshold has to be lowered significantly instead of being adjusted with inflation and being raised to the levels that it is right now. So about 5 lakh rupees you need to make in to be eligible to pay taxes. I think that threshold is far too high to capture enough of the tax base, in my view.
Rishabh, tell me this, that, is this something to do with, how taxes are calculated? I mean, how it's decided, on what you will include in your taxable income and what you will exclude. Because why I'm saying this is that, Praveen Chakravarti, if he was just to go to the Parliament parking lot, or if he was
Yes.
just to go to the Supreme Court or the Delhi High Court parking lot, the
Yeah.
kind of luxury cars he would see there,
Yes.
uh,
Absolutely.
or if he was just to drive across to Khan Market, and if he was to just take a look at the kind of shopping experiences available over there, the kind of numbers that we are talking about, the whole high-end consumption story in India, that does not tally with this kind of tax profile for the country. So either people are evading taxes, or the tax system is such that they can legally get away by not paying taxes.
Well, let me say a few things about this. The first thing is that in terms of salaries, it's a lot more straightforward to capture people who and their salaries, because there tend to be payroll taxes. So if your company is registered, it's in the formal sector, it pays your salary. Then they have some payroll which directly reports to the tax authorities, and those salaries are captured anyways. Now, the first thing is India's high consumption story is true in that consumption does fuel a lot of economic growth, and there is a lot of consumption in India. But ultimately, the consumption levels in India aren't exactly that lavish when you think about it. I mean, these cars, the fact that we see them, the basic fact is we see them in the richest cities like Delhi and Bombay. And of course, I know that there's farmers in parts of Punjab and parts of Maharashtra that also have these very luxurious cars, but we see them in small pockets of the richest cities in India. So should we be surprised that there are a small fraction of Indians, I would say less than 0.05% of the adult population, that can afford these luxurious goods? I don't think that's necessarily surprising. The other important thing to remember here is that a lot of India's consumption story is overblown in terms of the kinds of commodities people are consuming. Now, given that a lot of kids I know drink coffee at Starbucks and eat food in all these restaurants, but these restaurants aren't exactly serving luxury cuisines. Starbucks is a very standard chain across the world. It's not a chain for you to
No,
go
I'm
and
not
get.
talking about Starbucks over here. What I'm
Yeah.
talking about, is people who fly in, personal jets, people who own homes worth crores of rupees,
Yes. Yes.
people who
Yes.
live in palaces. And they may be a very small percentage of the total population, but we are talking absolute numbers here. Only three individuals filing in taxable income of more than 500 crore, and less than 2,000 individuals filing income of more than 10 crore, taxable income of more than 10 crore. 2,000, I mean, you'd see more than 2,000 luxury cars in just Delhi and Bombay.
Yeah, but
And the smaller cities have, places like Raipur, places like Rajkot. These places have tremendous luxury consumption. We are talking about high-end luxury consumption, destination weddings, that kind of stuff. I'm not
But
talking about
yeah,
Starbucks
yeah, yeah,
here.
I agree. But the fact that someone like Virat Kohli can afford a destination wedding is not surprising. He's a very high salary earner. He's captured in the income tax statistics. But and a lot of these palaces and real estate properties that we're talking about are people's wealth and not their income. So they should not be captured in their tax returns. They should be captured in, if there was a wealth tax or there was an estate tax of some kind, those they would be captured there. It's true that in
Sure,
yeah.
Rishabh. I mean, your property, is not a part of your income tax, but you're maintaining that property. You're paying salaries to the entire maintenance staff.
Yes,
That's
I agree. I
definitely
agree.
coming out of your income.
Yeah, but I mean, when we really think about it, how many people in India do this? Are they numbering in the millions so that we
So,
know
so
that
I
they are?
mean, so instead of arguing about, what percentage of the population we are talking about here, what is the way economists look at this to understand, if this is a good enough number or not? Uh, uh, 2,000 people declaring taxable income of more than 2,000 or more than 10 crore. Uh, what is the economics framework to look at this?
Well, there's a very simple distribution called the Pareto distribution that we usually try to fit to income tax data, just like this, tax return data like this. And depending on a certain parameter in that distribution, you can estimate what percentage of people should be above a certain cutoff. And in fact, with the Indian income tax data, you can see people at far higher extremes than you can with countries like the UK or the US. I mean, with this tax data, I can, in my distribution, I can see people who earn 10, 100, and 1,000 and 10,000 times the average taxpayer in India. And I'm saying average taxpayer, not the average Indian, the average taxpayer. Very significantly, you can capture them in the in the income tax distribution. You can see them by this mathematical formula. Now, I'm sure there is obviously a proportion that is evading taxes, people who make agricultural incomes, people who make cash under the counter. I'm sure there's all kinds of corrupt dealings going on. But the question is it significant enough to make a dent to our tax to GDP ratio? Is it more than, say, 2% of GDP? And on that, I would say I don't think it's very likely. And I think that the income tax data actually more or less tallies with India's GDP numbers, India's per capita income numbers. It's always going to seem like when I said that there are people who make 10, 100, 10,000 times the average income of a taxpayer, then the average taxpayer will walk around and see somebody who has assets or who has consumption that is 10, 100, or 10,000 times your own consumption. One should not be shocked if you drive some standard Maruti car and you go and you see a BMW in Khan Market in Delhi. That is not surprising. That is fully consistent with who you are as a taxpayer and who you see in the entire taxpayers distribution.
But what if I see, three Rolls Royce in my neighborhood?
Yes.
Is
Well,
is that striking?
in your neighborhood in Delhi,
In a suburb of Delhi?
yeah, I don't think it's surprising to see. I would say if Delhi has about 100 or 200 Rolls Royces, I don't think that should be very surprising. There will be some people in India whose income levels are comparable to the rich of the United States and the UK. The basic fact is that those people are very few in count, and that's why you don't see luxury cars everywhere in India. You see very few of them. I mean, it seems like a lot, but I don't think it's more than should be expected. And listen, a lot of this, I'm not going to butter up the evasion statistics here, but a lot of these are purchased with assets. I think by the sale of assets, those things will not get captured necessarily. I understand that, but at the end of the day, the GDP from the expenditure side should be capturing most of these things on the consumption side, and I think it more or less tallies up on the other side of the national accounts with the income
Okay, so
data.
so I get your argument. Your argument is that there may be some evasion, but it's not so significant that it could, if it were to be if it were to be included somehow, it
Yeah,
would not bump up the tax GDP ratio as much.
yeah.
But if we leave aside the high end, if we look at the middle part of the distribution of income tax, there also you don't think there's scope?
I think there is scope to capture quite a few people, but let's see. The median taxpayer in India, the median income tax filer actually, not the taxpayer, but the median income of a tax return filer in India is about 4 to 5 lakh rupees in 2017-18. 2017-18, the latest year of data, the median is about 4 to 5 lakh. I think that's about 3 times the per capita income of India in some sense, about 2 to 3 times. Um, can we really make, I mean, what do we want to do to capture taxes on that end? Do we really want to raise the tax rates on that population? Or do we want to raise do we want to lower the tax threshold significantly to capture that population? I'm not sure. I think that's, you're right, that is probably where most of the evasion is happening. I think a lot of small businesses, small informal businesses do make money on that end. But again, I don't think we could possibly bump up the tax GDP ratio in the millions by capturing people on that end. Of course, there's work to be done. Of course, people evade taxes everywhere. People misreport their income everywhere, like we discussed at the beginning with Donald Trump. People do this everywhere. I think but ultimately, if a country wants to increase its tax GDP ratio, it needs to have a high per capita income. It needs to have a high median income. And I think India ultimately should recognize that at $2,000 of per capita income, there's only so much you can collect in taxes without, exploiting or terrorizing the bulk of the population, which is basically living hand to mouth.
So what you're saying is that, instead of obsessing about the tax GDP ratio, instead of trying to tell ourselves that, well, we could have done so much better if so many people were more honest about paying taxes, instead of all the time focusing on that, what needs to be done is to make sure that more people earn large enough incomes so that we can expect them to pay taxes. So our focus should be on ensuring more and more people can earn more.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's face it, it's 2020 and India's per capita income has not gone above $3,000 or $4,000. And I think that is the challenge for a poor country like India, basically, to get enough people up to a level where they don't live hand to mouth, where they can make savings and then they can pay taxes. And I think we will probably capture a lot more taxes as a proportion of GDP, increasing our income levels, if we leave the tax threshold as they are. I mean, people like Abhijit Banerjee have been suggesting this for over 2 decades, I think, that if the income tax threshold of India was left at where it was, say, in the years 2000, 2001, today we probably would have a lot more people in the tax net. Now, is that fair to tax people who are making 1 lakh or 2 lakh rupees a year? I don't know if that's something that's feasible politically, but I think the tax GDP ratio of the country will rise automatically at a point where enough people make, say, 4, 5, 6 lakh rupees a year. I think at that point, if we leave the tax thresholds as they are, I think we'll have a lot more people in the tax threshold. Evasion will always happen. It's a basic fact of tax collection that people will always try to evade taxes. It's a basic fact of history that the rich and business owners have tried to evade taxes in every possible way. I don't think India can escape it, but I do think there's cause for optimism because the technology of the tax authorities increases every year. The technology improves every year. And as long as incomes are improving, you will eventually capture more people into the tax net. I mean, it's also worth thinking about whether a country at $2,000 of income can really take a comprehensive redistribution program redistributing money at such a low level of taxation does not really seem feasible when it comes to incomes. But where I will tell you one thing though, that you said that very few people make over 500 crores in income. I think very few people make above even 1 crore in annual income. I think India's income levels are low, but the amount of wealth and the levels of wealth that Indians have in their possession is probably a lot higher, and it scales a lot more at, say, a global level. I think that while the average Indian is far poorer than the average American or the average European, I think some of the richer, wealthier people of India probably are as wealthy as some of the wealthiest people in Europe and America.
Right. What I wanted to also say is that, as your friend Suranjali Tandon of NIPFP had told me in one of my episodes recorded a few weeks before this one, The idea is, I don't think there's any proposal to now, and she also recommends against it, to change the exemption levels, the threshold levels,
Yeah.
because although her analysis done for the CBDT shows that the threshold in India is actually much higher than it is in other countries.
Yeah.
But the fact is that even if they were to lower it, the potential gains of collecting more in taxes versus the cost of disrupting, once again, a set system, etc., making sure there are no leakages, etc., costs are probably, it's not worth it to undertake that exercise. So I don't think the argument here is at all about the threshold. I think the general impression is more about people at the higher end of the tax bracket, and the general impression is that more people could perhaps, be included if the system was more careful in going after tax evaders.
Yeah.
But again, you suggest that even if that was done, the potential gains there are not going to be that much. There aren't that many that rich people in India. So my last question to you then is that I fully agree that the best way to probably improve the tax GDP ratio is to make sure that you have more and more people earning more and more. But in such a situation, where somehow the conversation around how people can earn more, how the economy can perform better, how GDP can grow faster, when that conversation is almost always completely focused on how much government can spend. So you're
Yeah.
sort of in a catch-22 situation. Government needs to spend to make sure the economy performs better, but the government cannot spend because there aren't enough number of people earning high incomes, and therefore there isn't that much tax money. So there is a need to sort of change this narrative then.
Yes. Let me say a couple of things about this. First, I think Suranjini Tandon is the top tax economist in India, and anything that she has to say about taxes is probably the most well-researched advice you can get. I think since our graduate school days, I mean, I've always relied on her for the best advice. But I think she's right. I think what I'm trying to say about the tax distribution and top incomes is more or less also captured by what Ratan Roy has talked about in his idea that consumptions have. I mean, India has only focused on the consumption of the absolute rich and not so much of the poor. This is basically another facet. This is the other side of the same story. Um, Now, I don't necessarily agree that the country has to tax. I mean, the government has to tax to pay for its expenditure. I subscribe to a school where running fiscal deficits is not necessarily a problem, even in normal times, as opposed to much more. Well, I would say. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say about this year, but not exactly a normal year. I do think the government can spend more in terms of its fiscal deficit, but you're right, there is a catch-22 situation because the government will spend more by borrowing. It's going to borrow from some people. Those people are going to become more wealthy, and wealth inequality in India will increase. And wealth inequality, there is no tax on wealth inequality in India. There's only taxes on incomes. So India does find itself in a bit of a paradoxical situation. I think the basic fact is when you look at incomes, I think low incomes are taxed too much, and I think high incomes are not taxed enough. Um, but the basic solution for this, one which has no real answer, is that India needs to have a higher per capita income level to pay for these things, and that will take some difficult decisions in terms of the trade-off between growth and inequality in the long run.
On that note, Rishabh, let me say thanks to you, and you've given me ideas for asking my subsequent questions in my subsequent episodes.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Pooja.